sexy guys do. Explore what's all in their minds. Thinking about a thing or two, about a thing or two, about a thing or two. Mansplaining is deciding you're gonna search for the truth. Mansplain me, baby. Mansplain. There can be no thinking that would be uncool.
Welcome to Mansplaining, a podcast about the interesting things you can discover if you just take the time to learn. My name's Mark, and I'm your host for this week. And as always, I'm joined by Joe, an old friend from college. Together, we'll explore what's on our minds and hopefully figure out a thing or two about a thing or two. Joe, today's topic is something that I ponder from time to time, being a tech enthusiast, though it did start with a listener question that came into us by way of a Facebook message. And she mentioned that Google is currently embroiled in 2 federal lawsuits around antitrust action, and that maybe we wanted to do something there. Google is a company I think about a lot because I have a history with Google. Back in the day, I remember using AltaVista and Ask Jeeves, and then Google came along and made search a whole lot better. And in those early days, it was just this innovation machine. It was pushing out not just search upgrades, but also things like Gmail and Google Drive, and created products that I continue to use every single day, even all these years later. And in my mind, that's the old Google. And then the new Google is the one that's getting in trouble with the government, and it's because it's trying to prop up its dominance in search with things like massive cash payouts to companies like Apple to keep Google as the default search engine on iPhones. And it feels to me like it falls into that pattern of the new company that's young and exciting and trying to change the world, and then the older version of that company that is just old and afraid of competition and conservative. And it raises the question, what makes a company run out of new ideas? So I put that question to you with Google in the background, and I'm interested in hearing what you found out.
Yeah, well, I'm going to end up foregrounding Google at the beginning and end of my answer, but maybe the first thing I should say is I'm not a tech enthusiast, so I don't start with a knowledge base about that. And I think that's one of the things that makes this podcast interesting,
Sure.
Is that the questions I put to you are about things you generally don't think about, and vice versa.
Yeah.
You put questions to me about things that set me off on a tangent. And so I'm starting from a knowledge base on this question of almost zero. And sometimes that's our most interesting episodes. I don't know if you've noticed that in the past.
Yes. We set each other off down new paths, and then it's interesting playing off our preconceptions when we've thought about something for a while against the other person's new discoveries.
Yes, right. So I'm cautiously optimistic that this is going to be an interesting conversation. Let's get right in it. So you cited Google as your example of a company that's out of ideas. So let's start there. Google's ubiquitous search engine has joined other wildly popular products like Band-Aids, Kleenex, and Popsicles as a trademark name that's become a generic term.
Right.
But Alphabet Inc., the parent company of Google, is more than just a search engine. It's also, as you pointed out in your question, Gmail, the Chrome browser, Google Docs, Google Maps, the Android operating system, the Google Play App Store, and many other things. Why would a company responsible for so many crowd-pleasing products stop innovating? Maybe they're distracted by the 2 federal antitrust lawsuits they're facing. In 2020, the Trump Justice Department and 38 state attorneys general sued Google, alleging it had monopolized the search engine market. In August 2024, a federal judge ruled that Google violated the Sherman Antitrust Act, though that decision is now under appeal.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's a separate antitrust case filed last year in which the Biden DOJ accused Google of monopolizing the digital advertising industry by engaging in, quote, anti-competitive and exclusionary conduct, end quote, over the previous 15 years. That trial began last month. the potentially existential ramifications for Alphabet of adverse decisions in one or both cases include breaking up the company, preventing it from making deals to be the default search engine on other companies' web browsers or smartphones, or forcing it to make its underlying proprietary data available to competitors. So it's not surprising that Google seeks to retain its search dominance by any means necessary, because the advertising money it takes in is considerable. Competitors are nipping at its heels, though. Next year, Google's U.S. share of the $300 billion ad market for online search is projected to fall below 50%. It was 60% only 6 years ago. Whereas Amazon's share has risen to 22%, and Apple and Microsoft now have about 5% each.
Wow.
The AI startup Perplexity's new chatbot is also fielding search inquiries. Add to that Gen Z is largely bypassing Google altogether in favor of social media platforms like Instagram and TikTok, the latter of which already receives billions of search requests daily. Reddit is also ramping up its search functionality. Google certainly has the resources to adapt and fight to retain its decades-long market dominance. For perspective, it still has a 91% share of the global market and 5 billion active users worldwide, as opposed to TikTok's 1 billion users, Amazon's 310 million, and Perplexity's 10 to 15 million.
Yeah.
But Google's challenge is how best to compete with competitors like these whose search functionality is grafted onto commerce and/or social connection platforms, neither of which is Google's sweet spot. Google did the hard work to build the infrastructure for search and then instigate a massive behavioral change in consumers away from consulting older repositories of knowledge like dictionaries and encyclopedias to using online search engines to get quick answers to queries.
Yeah. If you remember, Joe, Yahoo.com was a big deal in the early internet, or maybe that was not within your frame of reference. I don't know.
No, I do remember. Yeah.
And my very first job out of graduate school was at Britannica.com, which was presented as the thinking person's Yahoo. So we were chasing after that target. And meanwhile, Google was making both of us irrelevant.
Yeah, I remember you in that job. Yeah. Once that infrastructure was in place, the transition was fast because consumers are fundamentally lazy and look for the easiest way to get their needs met. Why go to the library or even to your bookshelf to get a factual question answered if you can do it online? It's a variation on the design principle of keep it simple, stupid. I'm not immune to the allure of simplicity. My idea of a successful holiday season is to do as close as possible to 100% of my Christmas shopping online, and preferably on just one website like Amazon, rather than physically visiting stores.
Yeah. Yeah, that's you and me both. And in fact, I think studies have said that's a pretty standard male approach to shopping, which is at the very least, we go online first to decide what we're going to buy, as opposed to the other pattern, which is just go into a store and hope that inspiration strikes you.
Right. Impulse buying. Yeah, right. But, using that same logic, if you're a Gen Zer already living on TikTok and you can make search inquiries there, why use Google?
Yeah. Particularly since you are more likely to trust a recommendation from a friend than just a search result.
Right. Now, along with your question when you articulated it to me at the end of the last episode, you also offered me a tip about reading Clayton Christensen's work as a way of better understanding this topic.
Yes.
That was a really good tip, Mark. I got a lot out of that, and I want to spend some time on it today. Christensen was a consultant and professor at Harvard Business School who popularized the term disruptive innovation in a series of books on the subject. His first book, 1997's The Innovator's Dilemma, When New Technologies Cause Great Firms to Fail, was a huge bestseller and launched a cottage industry of business consultants preaching Christensen's gospel about how companies perish by not adapting quickly enough to new innovations and competitors. In it, he writes about what happens after an innovative company establishes itself by introducing disruptive technology to the marketplace. He picks up on the work of the Austrian economist Joseph Schumpeter, who popularized the term creative destruction in the 1940s to describe how new innovations replace and often render obsolete older innovations. The Wikipedia article on creative destruction put it this way, quote, "In Schumpeter's vision of capitalism, innovative entry by entrepreneurs was the disruptive force that sustained economic growth, even as it destroyed the value of established companies and laborers that enjoyed some degree of monopoly power derived from previous technological, organizational, regulatory, and economic paradigms." End quote. Creative destruction has since come to be understood by modern economists as a beneficial process, even though Schumpeter derived the idea from Karl Marx, who wrote about how capitalism annihilates itself and didn't see its creative destructive tendencies as necessarily beneficial.
Yeah.
Christensen presented data from different industries to argue that what appears to be sound business management can inadvertently bring about the decline and demise of a formerly innovative company. Here's a thumbnail of his argument. Disruptive technologies tend to emerge as lower-cost alternatives to existing technologies, and they often target new or underserved markets, at least at the start, sometimes by developing revolutionary products and services that its future customers may not even realize they want or need. By contrast, established companies tend to focus on sustaining innovation by maintaining their products and services and expanding the existing markets that serve their current customer base. Their organizational structure isn't as conducive to embracing disruptive innovation as it was back when they were doing the disrupting.
Right.
Their pragmatic strategies are focused on maintaining success, and that creates internal obstacles for innovation, which by definition requires embracing disruption. For that reason, established companies, like Google in your example, tend to underestimate, overlook, or even dismiss the potential of newly disruptive technologies, which often leaves room for upstarts to capture market share and ultimately disrupt or even displace industry leaders.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to think about this from the perspective of a VP within a company like that. This person individually has certain targets that they're supposed to hit within their performance review. And generally speaking, there's probably going to be a profit and loss statement for that division. And so anyone internal to the company who comes along and says, I have this idea that could be a big thing 10 years from now, but today it's going to, cut away at our profits. We're building for the future, but in the short term, we're going to lose something. That individual VP has very little incentive to empower that idea because it's going to put him or her in a bad position with respect to his own superiors. So there's this personal motivation to say no to ideas that will challenge the things that are driving your own evaluation within the job as a leader at the company.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. And the only thing I'd add is that it seems eminently reasonable and smart and sound to behave that way when you're in that position you described.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think it's the pragmatism of that ostensibly good, sound management practice that leads to the downfall of the company, because the rigid, inflexible focus on sustaining success hinders the company's ability to take advantage of potential opportunities.
Yeah.
As Christensen put it in the book, quote, "The very mechanism through which organizations create value are intrinsically inimical to change," end quote. After laying it out like that, it strikes me as a coherent theory, and so I'm not surprised it became so popular. Christensen offers the example of Sears, Roebuck and Company. Remember the Sears catalog, Mark?
Oh, yeah. That was a big deal.
Oh, yeah. We're both old enough to remember that. Many times looked at the Sears catalog and ordered from it with my mother. So Sears was a pioneer in both mail order catalogs and credit cards. People forget that part. They really were one of the first credit card companies. But its failure to stay on top of industry trends led to its surrendering those markets to companies like Visa, MasterCard, and online catalogs, all of which started as disruptive businesses capturing new customers or developing new applications in previously infeasible areas, eventually moving into Sears's market and leaving behind its legacy business model. Referring to companies like Sears, Christensen argued that, quote, it was as if the leading firms were held captive by their customers, enabling attacking firms to topple the incumbent each time a disruptive technology emerged, end quote. As you also mentioned when you gave me the tip to review the Innovator's Dilemma, Christensen's work has faced numerous critiques over the years. None more fierce than the one from his Harvard colleague, the historian Jill Lepore. Writing in The Atlantic in 2014, Lepore noted how Christensen's theory of disruption had become sacrosanct in business circles despite how suspect it was, telling an interviewer later, quote, for years, people who've pointed out the theory's flaws, inconsistencies, and inadequacies have been shouted down or ignored, as if belief in disruption were a matter of faith, and to question it on evidentiary grounds amounted to heresy, end quote. In her piece, she poked several holes in Christensen's argument. Among other things, she disputed his portrayal of a disk drive company as a victim of disruptive innovation, pointing out that it survived and eventually thrived from having to compete with its upstart rivals. She also questioned Christensen's broad application of his theory beyond for-profit companies to include healthcare and education firms in his follow-up books, The Innovator's Prescription and Disrupting Class. Christensen replied by characterizing Lepore's takedown as, quote, a criminal act of dishonesty, end quote. Think he's a little bit defensive?
Yeah, sounds like the sort of respectful debate that I remember so well from academia. Yeah.
Right, yeah. Jane, you ignorant slut.
Exactly.
From Saturday Night Live.
Yes.
Yeah. But Lepore's was not the only takedown. In 2015, Dartmouth business professor Andrew A. King and a graduate student named Balgir Batartatak, writing in the MIT Sloan Management Review, set out to test the essential validity and generalizability of Christensen's disruptions theory by conducting interviews with all 77 companies referenced in the Innovator's Dilemma and the Innovator's Solution. They found that only about 7 of the 77 fit Christensen's own criteria of what constitutes disruptive innovation. Even more importantly, they concluded that the disruptors rarely win, and that the hordes of venture capitalists and startup founders who've built their strategic plans around Christensen's theory might be in for a rude awakening.
Yeah.
They wrote that, quote, stories about disruptive innovation can provide warnings of what may happen, but they are no substitute for critical thinking and no replacement for careful analysis and difficult choices, end quote. Christensen dismissed their criticism as well, emphasizing that, quote, at the end of the day, the test of a theory is its usefulness, and many company executives have found disruption a powerful lens to help them respond to shifts in their industries, end quote. I think he's right about that. What I take from this back and forth is that Christensen's theory provides a useful framework for understanding how some companies atrophy when they begin to consolidate their successes instead of staying lean and hungry so they can recognize and act upon future disruptive technologies. But it's more like a description than a theory of the business world. And it shouldn't be relied upon as gospel truth because it just doesn't apply to every case.
Sure, yes.
As Hayden Shaughnessy wrote in Forbes, quote, "There is no real theory of why firms fail or why they succeed. There can be 1,000 lists and to-dos, but in the end, the variables are overwhelming." End quote.
Yeah.
With minds like steel traps, walking door here to the sun. The interesting things you can discover if you just take the time to learn. And it's a calling and they do it for you. Explain me, baby. Explain. It's a calling that you don't do it to.
Indeed, though many large established companies might stop innovating for the reasons Christensen mentioned, there are some that don't stop. Like Amazon, which started as an online bookseller but has since disrupted numerous industries, from entertainment to cloud computing to its now ginormous retail operation, and I've already mentioned its recent gains in online search.
Right.
Amazon remains an innovative disruptor because of its willingness to continuously explore new technologies and markets rather than prioritizing shoring up and sustaining its prior successes, though it does some of that too. It also listens to ideas bubbled up from its employees, like when an Amazon engineer used the company's virtual suggestion box to propose free shipping, which became the basis for the uber-profitable Amazon Prime service that is predicted to reach 80% of U.S. households by 2029.
Right, right. Another example that we can slot in next to Amazon is Apple, because Christensen went to his grave predicting that Apple was going to fail as a company any day now.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He kept reiterating that Apple was definitely doomed because of the predictive power of his theory. And yet Apple, I think today, is the number one or the number two most valuable company in the world.
Yes.
So there were definitely some blind spots within Christensen's theory.
Yes, I didn't know that about Christensen being down on Apple, but you've definitely passed the mind reading test, Mark, because I was going to go to Apple next. Because having this conversation gets you to thinking about other potential exceptions or exemplars of Christensen's theory. And I agree with you that Apple is definitely an exemplar. Apple, with their ambitious trajectory from PCs to iPhones to watches to virtual and augmented reality devices, seems to be a perpetual innovator. But here's something interesting. Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs hails him as more of a tweaker and tinkerer than a visionary, though he's a tweaker par excellence.
Yeah.
According to Isaacson, Jobs perfected items like the smartphone and the tablet that had already been invented by others.
Yeah, I think that was absolutely key to what made Jobs significant within the technology field, which is that he personally was not a technologist. He was just sort of techno-literate, but Jobs's insistence was on a certain aesthetic quality. He liked to talk about how his father once, when he was a child, pulled a cabinet away from the wall and showed him that the back of the cabinet was as beautiful as the front, as an object lesson that a true craftsman cares about the parts of the product that customers won't even see. And he carried those things forward. And so he would work ceaselessly to sand the rough edges off of Apple's products until he thought that they were absolutely perfect.
Yes.
And that's really what distinguished the company under his leadership and the company since then, is that they will release something like the Apple Watch. And it's not super well received when it first comes out, but they never stop working on it, and they get it better and better and better, and it arrives at dominance rather than being perfect right out of the gate.
Yes. Yes. And there's a genius in that kind of tweaking, I would argue. And I think Walter Isaacson argues that in his book about Jobs. Now, Netflix is another innovator that comes to my mind, starting from humble beginnings as a mail-order DVD rental company, then expanding to streaming and on-demand video, and now content production. And that example brings to mind Blockbuster, which dominated video rentals until Netflix came along and eliminated the need to leave home to get your fix of old movies. I think we can safely put Blockbuster in the Sears category.
Right.
Wouldn't you agree?
I would. And of course, Blockbuster had a chance to buy Netflix for not much money at all, and they said no to that deal. So those executives definitely were left with a hangover on that decision.
Yeah. Christensen's book came out a year before Google was founded in 1998 by Larry Page and Sergey Brin. But his advice for established companies, like Google, is to be more aware of potential competition from nimble startups, even if they haven't yet achieved an economy of scale because of their limited size and small margins, and to recognize the potential in smaller or emerging markets by looking beyond one's existing customer base when exploring the development of new products. He also recommended assigning the development of disruptive technologies to an independent in-house team that's hungry enough to be motivated by small successes and placed in an environment where early failures don't deter continued investment of time and money, since the slight tweaking of those failures often leads to unanticipated success, as we just said about Steve Jobs. That's an innovator's mindset, often described as ready, fire, aim.
Mm-hmm.
And to that last point, the best disruptive ideas are not always obvious. Sometimes they happen by accident, and the genius comes in recognizing one when it falls in your lap. Organizational psychologist David Burkus, writing in the Harvard Business Review, underscores this point. Quote, "In most organizations, innovation isn't hampered by a lack of ideas, but rather a lack of noticing the good ideas already there." End quote.
Yeah.
Take the story of Dr. Spencer Silver, a scientist working for the giant Minnesota-based conglomerate 3M, which I learned in my research stands for Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing.
I did not know that. Thank you.
Yeah, nor did I. Silver was trying to formulate a stronger, more durable adhesive, and one of his experiments yielded an adhesive that stuck lightly to surfaces. While it was technically a failure in that the adhesive element was removable, Silver was intrigued by the result and spent years trying to find a practical use for it. Eventually, he partnered with another 3M scientist named Art Fry, who sang in his church choir and was frustrated that he couldn't mark the hymns they were going to sing in his hymnal because the slips of paper he used kept falling out. He needed a bookmark that could stick to paper without damaging the pages. Together, Silver and Fry developed the Post-its that revolutionized not only bookmarking but also note-keeping. Were it not for their persistence and an employer giving them the time and space to innovate, they might have walked away from billions of dollars in profit. And they'd be far from the first company to do so. You mentioned Blockbuster a minute ago. How about this one? Kodak invented the first digital camera,
Yes.
but decided not to pursue it,
Yes.
thus relinquishing that ground to Sony, which eventually developed its own prototype, and in so doing became the company synonymous with digital photography.
Yeah, another example in that light is that the things that made the first Macintosh computer distinctive with the graphical user interface and the use of the mouse, those ideas Steve Jobs got when he was given a tour of the Xerox PARC research lab, because all of that had been developed at Xerox, but executives there decided not to pursue those ideas.
So yeah, there are numerous examples, but the question that this begs is, how do companies like Kodak and Xerox miss such opportunities? David Burkus argues that there exists, quote, a bias against new and creative ideas when we're faced with even small amounts of uncertainty.
Yes.
The same uncertainty that triggers the need for companies to innovate may also be triggering executives to be rejecting the discoveries that could help them gain a competitive advantage. End quote. In your earlier comment, you said something similar to that. I really think there is something to this.
Yeah.
It's also likely that those companies didn't have an internal system for recognizing and planning for innovation, probably because they didn't promote and foster a learning environment. As one business website put it, quote, "Creating a culture where people are engaged and motivated is critical to encouraging and supporting innovation within the organization." End quote. The openness to employee suggestions must be genuine. Offering public praise or other tangible rewards for good suggestions is one way to demonstrate genuine interest. Another is setting up an efficient system to review, evaluate, and provide meaningful feedback and support for incoming ideas.
Yeah.
A recent study by the management consulting firm Accenture found that 72% of companies allow innovations to die on the proverbial vine because they never formalize a review and evaluation process.
Right. Plus, there are so many structures inside of large businesses to prevent that sort of thing from happening. If you work in a large company, which I have, and you have an idea, to get it approved, you might need to get 5, 6, maybe 10 people in a row to say yes to your idea.
Yes.
And if any one of them says no, then the idea doesn't go any further, because each yes allows you access to the next person up the chain.
Yes.
And so there are just so many ways for an idea to die on the vine before it really had an opportunity.
Yes, that's the stodgy bureaucracy as opposed to the lean and mean startup, right?
Yes.
That's nimble. Yeah. Brian Uzzi, a business professor at Northwestern, described the conundrum this way. Quote, "Innovation requires allocation and deployment of organizational resources, often significant amounts, without definitive proof of future returns." End quote. That runs afoul of the innate conservatism of so many companies, which want to build on existing successes by improving incrementally at the margins, as opposed to chasing new ideas with money that might not provide a return on investment. As Clayton Christensen suggested, most established companies are looking for immediate profitability, significant commercial impact, and they are uncomfortable exploring projects with unknown or unlikely outcomes. Too many companies view an out-of-the-box idea as what Uzzi calls, quote, "a resource-depleting departure from the organization's existing agenda," end quote.
Right.
Unless its success can be virtually guaranteed. And to that point, Hewlett-Packard, a company valued at more than $100 billion, decided that its new projects had to generate at least $1 billion just to receive a green light. That's a threshold that would kill off many good ideas.
Yeah, not a lot of copies of The Innovator's Dilemma being passed around inside the walls of Hewlett-Packard.
Yeah. In light of all this information I just presented, and circling back to your original question, Mark, my conclusion is that companies don't run out of new ideas so much as they run out of the courage to keep innovating, which requires risk-taking and being unafraid of failure.
Yeah.
Fear of failure is the mortal enemy of innovation. As Christensen laid out in his book, established companies are risk-averse, whereas by and large it's smaller, less established companies that are willing to take the gambles that produce market-changing disruptions. As they say, no guts, no glory. And if you fail, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because failure is full of teachable moments. The financial software company Intuit hosts company-wide failure awards in which teams whose ideas failed but provided valuable lessons to the company are recognized, thus encouraging innovation by discouraging fear of failure.
Yeah.
Lest we think that the company that inspired this episode, Google, is devoid of new ideas, I want to close with these two items. First, a reminder that Google has swung and missed big in recent years with products like Google Glass, the prototype of a hands-free wearable device that was supposed to allow the user to take pictures, read texts and respond to them by voice, navigate around town, and engage in video chats. It was the best thing since sliced bread, except for one tiny detail. Nobody wanted to use it.
Yeah.
That's a failure of execution, or perhaps an idea that was ahead of its time, as opposed to a lack of ideas.
Yeah.
And second, on October 9th, a week after you asked me this question, Mark, Demis Hassabis, the CEO of Google's DeepMind AI lab, and John Jumper, one of its chief scientists, were 2 of 3 people awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for their research on using AI neural networks to fight disease and better understand the human body. Just the day before that, on October 8th, the former Google VP and researcher Geoffrey Hinton, the acknowledged godfather of AI, whose name has come up before on this podcast, shared the Nobel Prize in Physics for his pioneering work on AI. Google has long been reinvesting billions of dollars of its search engine profits into long-term research projects with the explicit goal of benefiting humankind. These Nobel wins were not only an acknowledgement of AI's growing role in our lives, but also a reminder of Google's continuing large role in and outsized influence on many aspects of science and the American economy.
Yeah.
So maybe, just maybe, disruptive innovation and sustaining innovation really aren't mutually exclusive after all. But what do you think, Mark?
I think that's fair. Yeah, there's a lot that goes on at Google that's completely beneath the hood of that car that people like me just don't see. And one good example of that is their groundbreaking research into artificial intelligence. Pretty much all major AI models today are based on a research paper that came out of Google about 5 or 6 years ago. So yes, they are doing basic groundbreaking work that's having huge implications today. So I was probably being a little unfair in saying that they're out of ideas. I will, however, just make one small point in the opposite direction, which is that Google's approach to AI at the consumer level seems to be to plug AI into search in a way that allows them to continue to surface advertising results. So they do tend to snap back to the importance of search returns, which is natural because, as I understand it, that's pretty much the only way they make money right now.
Yeah. So maybe the best way to put this then is Google Alphabet is this multi-headed hydra that is not lacking for good ideas or executing on them, as the Nobel Prize results show. But then there's this corporate structure, the search engine folks, kind of an ossified bureaucracy that's facing this existential challenge in antitrust and is doing all it can to just desperately hold on to what it's got. And that's the opposite of the idea machine.
Yeah.
You know, so it's both and, not either or, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree. I think the more nuanced description of Google, rather than just calling it a company without ideas, is that it is a company that is composed of some truly brilliant individuals, like astoundingly accomplished and brilliant people working at that company, many of whom come up with powerful, forward-thinking ideas that could change everything. And at the top of that are executives who are trying to make sure that their P&L statements come in on target and that Wall Street is happy with the results. And so there is probably a little bit of war going on between people lower down who are pushing forward on things within AI and other areas, some applied research like robotics and self-driving cars, and then an executive rank, which might be more conservative and might be thinking we need to maintain focus and might be saying no to many of those really good ideas so that people like you and me just never see them out in the wild.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. But putting aside Google, I hope my answer helped explain how some companies do run out of ideas, you know, Blockbuster and Sears, and how they run out of ideas. There are reasons for that. And I think it's the ultimately fear and conservatism, which is kind of anathema to innovation.
Right.
Is the proximate cause for that.
And I think the crowning irony and possibly the best argument in defense of Clayton Christensen's ideas is that disruptive innovation has really been the rallying cry for Silicon Valley from the beginning. Like the move fast and break things motto of companies like Facebook is based on disruptive innovation and embracing the idea that we are going to innovate in a way that is disruptive. And yet some of the best examples that we came up with here of companies that attempt to resist disruptive innovation and to ignore it and to sweep it under the rug until it's too late are companies in Silicon Valley. So it does kind of lend force to the idea that this is something that is just an irreducible aspect of how we process information and how executives run businesses. Successful businesses have so much to lose that they will consistently be blindsided by someone coming up from behind them with a product that at first blush seems significantly inferior to what that bigger company can offer, but that has better long-term prospects.
Yeah, and let's just hope that the move fast and break things ethos, that one of the things that doesn't get broken is our democracy.
Well, I guess we'll see in a couple of weeks now, won't we?
Yeah, let's hope that's not the collateral damage of that way of thinking.
Okay, well, thank you. This was a very interesting conversation, and I enjoyed it.
Great. So I've got a question for you for next time.
Lay it on me.
All right. So, Mark, you just asked me what makes a company run out of ideas. And that got me thinking about a topic I've been interested in for my entire adult life and seriously considered wedging into my answer to your question before deciding instead to ask you about it. So for reasons that will soon become apparent, maybe we should consider this a two-part episode. My reference point is not companies. It's pop and rock music. But I have essentially the same question for you that you just put to me. What makes so many of our favorite rock and pop artists run out of ideas? Another way of putting it is, why does the work of so many irrefutably great popular music artists decline as they get older? And if that's not enough for you to chew on, here's an optional question should you choose to go there. Might some of Clayton Christensen's ideas about the innovator's dilemma apply to the work of musical artists?
Okay, that's very interesting. It's not a question I'd considered before, so it'll be completely a blank page that I'm starting with. And really, those are the best questions, I think. So thank you.
Yeah. So two sides of the same mirror here. And I think this is going to be an interesting conversation as well.
Indeed. Well, I will get started on researching that one. And with that, we'll bring this episode to a close. That was Joe. I'm Mark. And thank you for spending your time with us.
We'll talk to you next time.
Well, I thought I was the market leader, yeah, top of the chain. She was my steady partner, and I thought I knew her game. But then along came a new fella, sleek, shiny, and bold. And she jumped on his value proposition, left me out in the cold. I got the innovator's dilemma blues. Baby, can't you see? Disrupted by a low-end player I did not foresee. While I was busy optimizing, doing just what I do, she pivoted to his motto. Now I'm yesterday's news. I tried to sustain her, gave her incremental things, but she was looking for that fresh change, something off the main. I thought I was improving, making processes lean. Didn't know she'd benchmarked me and found me routine. Yeah, I got those innovators dilemma blues, so hard to explain. Well, I was focused on the core, she found value down the chain. He came in as a disruptor, with features cheap and new. Damn, I'm obsoleted, man, and my forecast is looking blue. Now I could have pivoted, but my market was clear. The metric said she'd stay year after year, but his value curve was sharper, his appeal more broad. Now I'm just legacy tech, my prospectus deeply flawed. I thought I had loyalty, I thought I was her base, but he brought that asymmetry, reshaping the space. I'm the victim of the paradigm shift, couldn't scale down. Now she's a happy early adopter, while I'm wearing a frown. I got the innovator's dilemma blue, man, left in the past. She saw his disruptive model, and she jumped ship fast. Couldn't see the threat, thought my value was strong. Now I'm obsolete, baby, singing this heartbreak song. So let this be a lesson to all market leaders out there. You think you're a monopoly, you don't want to share. Disruptive forces are lurking in ways you can't foresee. And if you don't innovate, boy, she'll leave you like she left me. I'm just yesterday's tech, baby, cautionary tale, you see.
Mansplaining is brought to you by Joe and Mark and nobody else. Music composed and performed by the Mansplaining House Band. Thank you for spending your time with us, and we'll see you next time.
Best way is deciding you're gonna search for the truth. Mansplain me, baby. Mansplain. There can be no faking, that would be uncool.
Attention mansplaining listeners. If you want to engage with Mark and me, you have some options. One is to go to our Facebook page, Mansplaining the Podcast, where you can leave a comment or question, check our sources, suggest topics for future episodes, or just like us, because who doesn't want to be liked? You can also reach us through whatever app you use to listen to this podcast by giving us a 5-star rating or writing a review of your favorite episode. Or you can call and leave us a message on our dedicated voicemail box, which is 206-486-4074. It's lonely in podcast land, and we welcome and appreciate any feedback you might want to share. Act now, and we'll throw in a set of Ginsu knives. Not really.